The next speaker is the Honourable Milam.
House Chairperson, Mr. President, there is a Latin phrase dating back 2,000 years. It goes, quis custodiet ipsos custodes, which translates to, who will guard the guardians? It refers to the need to keep a watchful eye on those in power, to ensure they do not abuse their positions for personal gain. In the State Capture Report, Chief Justice Raymond Zondo noted, quote, it is necessary to consider what explains why state capture and corruption were able to become so entrenched and to persist over an extended period, and to consider in particular why institutions which ought to have contributed to detecting or addressing these maladies may not have been as effective in doing so as one would have hoped. Amongst these institutions is Parliament, end quote. Chief Justice Zondo goes on to note that Parliament has a constitutional duty to exercise oversight over the executive branch of government, including organs of state such as state-owned entities and the executive, which is accountable to Parliament. In this regard, it is also worth noting that Section 55, subsection 2 of the Constitution states that the National Assembly must provide for mechanisms to ensure that all executive organs of state in the national sphere of government are accountable to it, and to maintain oversight over the exercise of national executive authority, including the implementation of legislation and any organ of state. Now, you may well ask, what does that have to do with the budget vote on the presidency? And it's a good question. You see, the Zondo report identifies a lack of oversight over the executive, and in particular over the presidency, as one of the key factors permitting state capture and corruption to flourish. The report recommended that a dedicated portfolio committee be established to oversee the actions and omissions of the President and ministers in the presidency. In a progress report on the implementation of the Zondo Commission recommendations in June of last year, the presiding officers of the Sixth Parliament noted that they were studying international best practices on the need for a portfolio committee to oversee the presidency, and that this would provide a foundation for the Seventh Parliament. Well, here we are, and nothing has been done. The Seventh Parliament has been established, and there's still no meaningful oversight over the presidency. Impeached former Judge Hlophe suggested that by moving state-owned entities into a centralized holding company under the presidency, they would now be unaccountable to Parliament, and asked whether the DA would reiterate its call for a portfolio committee over the presidency. Let me make it very clear. We do so, and we do so proudly. But he can also rest assured that we will be calling those state-owned entities to the relevant line departments' portfolio committees to account to them. Dr. Hlophe also raised the issue of the size of your cabinet. He would do well to remember that his party's leader, the unlamented former President Jacob Zuma, led the largest cabinet in the world. But I don't expect him to acknowledge that inconvenient truth. In 2019, at the start of the Sixth Parliament, President Ramaphosa, you announced that you would be implementing ministerial performance agreements for every cabinet member. It took 2 years for Parliament to have sight of these, and we still have no idea of how any of those ministers performed. No assessments were released. At a guess, they did not do very well, because if they had, they would be shouting it from the rooftops. So, Mr. President, we implore you, put performance agreements in place over your ministers in this administration, and then report back to Parliament on a regular basis on how they are doing against those targets that have been set for them. It was ironic to hear Honourable Malema speak about broken promises. His own promises, such as the school he undertook to build in December 2019, remain unfulfilled. As a reminder, Honourable Malema said, and I quote, "If we don't build that school in the next 5 years, don't re-elect us next time because we would be useless." The people of South Africa were clearly listening and responded accordingly, as demonstrated in the electoral decline of the EFF. The Honourable Indahlela came out strongly against the Constitution of South Africa, the very same Constitution he and his fellow MPs in MK swore to uphold just a few short weeks ago. The so-called Progressive Caucus are quick to point to the Constitution as the single biggest obstacle to uplifting South Africa out of poverty and transforming our society. But if the people of South Africa really wanted our Constitution changed so fundamentally, or worse, discarded, they would have rewarded those radicals and fascists with more seats in this House. So here's the DA's promise. As strict constitutionalists and believers in the rule of law, we are going to watch every commitment made very carefully. We are going to track performance closely, and we will hold every member of the executive responsible for their actions. Transparency, accountability, and openness are cornerstones of our democracy in South Africa. These hard-won values are enshrined in our Constitution. It is past time that the executive pay more than mere lip service to them and actually account to Parliament when we ask questions or interrogate budgets or seek to scrutinize their activities. We trust that the addition of other parties to the executive will lead to a greater degree of responsiveness and accountability. The Democratic Alliance in Parliament will not permit the malfeasance of the past, state capture and corruption, to stand unchecked. We will not absolve the presidency of its responsibility to account to Parliament, not on our watch. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is the Honourable Gubane.
Honourable Speaker, the Progressive Caucus, and honourable members of the National Assembly. Honourable members, we are called here to come and pass a budget vote. That is not known how much budget that we are voting for. And Honourable Ntshavheni comes here and tells us about 600 million rand that it's a budget of the presidency. But we know here for sure that the president has swallowed all the entities which are under the public enterprise. These enterprises are Alexco, Denel, SA Express, South African Forestry Company, and Transnet. And that budget, we are not told how much, but we are called here to come and pass the budget in the presidency. Hence, the previous speaker here has emphasized that we've been advocating now and again, that there needs to be an ad hoc committee that guards the presidents on spend and utilization. The markets or private sector have not been playing its role in your tenure, Mr. President, of contributing in developing this country. They've been profit-focused all along. They found their man in you. Triple PE has been reversed. Affirmative action is now an optional. Hence, you'll never see the economic growth in this country. The resource being mobilized has been insufficient by this government. To prove, Mr. President, that the economic advice that you've been getting along, that you've been given all along in your presidency, it's on the previous occasion where you found out that the economic advisor in your presidency does not even have a PhD or whatever. It was just misleading. That's to prove that most of your economic advisory are misleading. The transformation has been reversed, Mr. President, over the years in your tenure. On freight logistics, Mr. President, freight and logistics separation roadmap mess is nothing but a privatization in disguise. Small miners will not participate in the rail network. With the private sector participation, the PSP, you are busy planting private sector friends for takeover. What is happening in this privatization is a serious crime, Mr. President, in freight and logistics. In your tenure, Mr. President, you are finishing all the SOEs. The privatization of Durban Container Terminal, this entity met all its financial obligations correctly with no hurdles. The rail reform is meant to exclude black people. The digital infrastructure you are talking about is in a mess state of affairs in Johannesburg, in Durban, and everywhere else. But you stood here speaking as if you will be doing something to improve this part. The unemployed youth has been marching with graduation gowns up and down, not finding employment. Where, Mr. President, have you ever seen in the world unemployed doctors? You've never seen that. You might have it in Cuba because there's an influx of doctors. But we're having doctors in this country that are unemployed. On the IMF, Mr. President, the 1.5 trillion investment, it has a lot of debt in it as well. The SIU is serving at your pleasure, and it's not independent because you are controlling it. If you want to deal with the people, you just sign a proclamation in that SIU. State capture reports that we've been hearing a lot of them today are useless report, Mr. President, because you still have ministers who were implicated in this report, but they are sitting here with you. What you've been doing, Mr. President, in a nutshell, you've been taking all these departments that ANC has failed to deliver on them. You've taken all of them, you've dumped them to the DA. For example, Mr. President, the Department of Agriculture, it has never yielded anything to our people. Instead of solving the problem of the Agriculture Department, you are taking it, you are dumping it to the DA. The pit toilets, Mr. President, on the basic education, have been sitting with Minister Angie for years. She's been failing to solve pit toilet in our school. What you do, because you know that the ANC has been failing in all this department, you're taking that department, you are dumping it to Minister Kwahube. That's all what you've been doing. Because the ANC has failed on many occasions on the basic things of our people. We will be an irritation to you, Mr. President, because we want you to account as all other presidents. We've said this on all other committees. We've said that we need an ad hoc committee in your presidency. Mr. Mtumiseni Ntuli comes here and speak a good English about the balance of forces and everything, the partner in GNU and all else, whereas the development effort is not inclusive in this country, and there is nothing political about this GNU. Last but not least, Mr. President, I would rather belong to a parliament of wise owls than a mere collective of misguided weavers that you've been talking about here, Mr. President. Mr. President, Honorable Malema is speaking the truth. You are the Bruno Mtolo of our lifetime. I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member.